Hey everybody, KC here. So I just finished having an extended conversation with Richard Lui. Now you may know that name. Richard Lui is a correspondent and anchor for MSNBC, but he's just come out with a really interesting book. It's called Enough About Me. And basically what the book is about selflessness. And it has both a component of spirituality to it. He frames it very much in terms of what he learned as a caregiver for his dad, who continues to suffer from Alzheimer's disease. But it's also, I think, is full of great business lessons. Because companies that are selfless in terms of their employees, in terms of their customers, thinking about being employee-centric and customer-centric instead of just focusing on what top management needs. I always think those are the companies that are both more interesting and in the end more successful. They're the ones that change the world. They're the ones that move the needle. And so Enough About Me is a really, really interesting book. I caught up with Richard Lui before just a little bit before he had to go into work at 30 Rock. I was glad he spent some time with me, and I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Richard Lui, welcome to Morning News Beat.
Hey, it's good to be here, Kevin. Thanks.
So Enough About Me, a book I really, really enjoyed. It's a book about selflessness, and it has a spiritual component to it, and sort of the spine of the narrative is your dad's struggle with Alzheimer's and sort of what you learned about selflessness from being a caregiver. I thought it was interesting, and this is sort of I guess inside the Beltway sort of question. But on the blurb of at the front of the book, there are a bunch of blurbs.
Yep.
The very first one was from Ron Insana of CNBC, in which he said, "Enough About Me is a must-read for business leaders that will forever change the way you think about selflessness." Were you sort of aware going into it that you were going to frame the issue beyond just the notion of just interpersonal relationships?
Yes, absolutely. What is interesting, Kevin, is that is the narrative that most often is heard when I do talk about the book. You know, you understand when you're covering a story or you're covering a development in technology, for instance, there's certain things that just stick.
Right.
And the caregiving part of where this book started is what sticks.
But the broader lessons, it seems to me. I mean, one of the things that you write about at one point in the book is I think you frame it as the creative kindness of your boss at MSNBC, who, when you went to her, I think it was, to say, "Hey, this is my dad's issue. I need to figure out how to deal with it." Could have said, "Well, listen, you have some choices to make here," but didn't. Basically said, "Let's figure out a way to make this work."
And that is the interesting part of the opportunity to be selfish Inc. or selfless Inc. And when I walked in, I expected her to say, "Well, that's great, Richard. We like you. I hired you. But the way journalism works is we need you to run whenever we need you to run, right? We need to send you." And that typically was what happened. Except she said, I'm also taking care of my mother long distance in Florida. And so let's come up with an idea together, 4 ideas. And so we had 4 ideas. And then when it came time to pull the trigger and for me to start needing to fly from New York, where I work, to San Francisco, where my dad was, I effectively created 2 places where I lived. And in 1 year, when I counted the days, I was living more days in California, yet still working Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in New York, if you counted the hours. And that was the seedling, as I mentioned earlier, about, what is it to think and care about somebody else to such a degree? And that started, the long distance back and forth started about 6 years ago. But the beginning of the conversation probably started about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because at many companies, leaders and success, they're sort of ranked on a maximize profits and minimize expenses sort of scale. But what I got from reading your book was sort of the sense that more enlightened companies are thinking about maximizing people, and that while at the end of the day, while that may be it can be viewed as selfless, or it can be viewed as eventually good for the bottom line in a lot of different ways.
And I think the idea that it needs to be either one or the other is an important concept, as you saw in the book, in that so long as we're above midpoint, we're moving the ball forward in selflessness, because it's almost impossible to be 100% selfless, almost. And that's okay. And we need to kind of accept that. And organizationally, yes, businesses, for instance, as you know, we cite a lot of studies and a lot of research, some original, just some that's out in the marketplace that we could dive deeper in. And part of my team for the book was a scientist as well as a researcher. And we brought in, because I basically wrote it for myself, Kevin, saying if I, being a former business guy and working in a lot of startups and working in banking and strategy consulting, I was thinking like that. Like, if I were to read this, what would make me want to consider doing something selflessly? Well, first of all, the research is my answer. The second answer would be, don't shake a finger at the person. And number three, learn to laugh along the way. And so those are the three things I did. I was working with two comedians. I was working with illustrators. I have a cartoonist. You can see that I have cartoons in the book as well. And I don't think when you pick up the book about selflessness that you maybe I think folks will look at the cover, and I'm just looking at it right now, and I think you'll leaf through it and you'll see some things in there that might surprise you. Like, there's 4 poems at the end. What are poems doing in a book like this? Some might say.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I don't know that I've ever read any Richard Dawkins. But basically, the way you frame it is that he sort of thinks that selfishness is sort of our natural state, and this whole book seems to be a rebuke to that. That you are, I think, are arguing that at least a higher level of selflessness is. And I even think that you use journalism as an example of that, because journalism, not always, but often, is about uncovering the good in a story, even when the story is about bad news. It's about finding the good, finding those selfless people. Those are the stories that stick.
Those are the stories that stick, and it's a great chapter name. I got to use that. But that's right. It is a chapter name. But my thought is that journalism within itself is a selfless profession, because we are telling the product, right, when you see it, is about other people. It's not me talking about me all the time. And when I joined CNN in Atlanta, and I was about to go on stage on air for CNN International, the anchor was just finishing some breaking news out of Fukushima. You remember there's a nuclear reactor that was burning up. And we're in break before I go on. He says, "Oh, Richard, yeah, man, what a story. I remember when I was living in Japan for 5 years in the bureau and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da." And I was like, you didn't bring that up once in your coverage. And, traditional journalism it ain't about me. It is not about me. It is about the story. And that is what I think in business writ large, the beginnings of business were based on a selfless notion. The power of commerce, the decision-making was centralized in the royal government, in the feudal lords, right? And if you and me, if Kevin and Richard wanted to get something, it had to go through the feudal system. Boop, boop, and then back down to us. But then business was created to normalize and equalize that which you and me can give to each other, and hopefully have a closer sense of what might be equity. Closer. I'm not going to say it's perfect. And so the thought of business being that extreme of no good It is possible, but its very structure at the beginning was not that. It had a strong selfless notion. And today, I believe the opportunity to be selfless Inc. is quite high. We've already seen it after living through COVID that businesses have really stepped up in so many ways to keep their employees paid, keep healthcare moving, giving you paid leave or leave when you need it. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying we're moving in the right way. And so as the new structures in industry are coagulating, are firming up, are codified, we're going to see something different on the other side, something better. I don't know what it is, Kip, but I do know that all of the exercises, all the do stuff and what business has done will be, have been good and has worked for most. And so I think that may move forward. It may move forward.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, you talk about COVID, and it seems to me that at some level, maybe there's been a sort of almost an existential struggle between the two. I don't want to overstate it,
Sure.
right? Because you had the healthcare workers who, were heroic and selfless beyond almost beyond imagination. And you even had, supermarket workers who and delivery people who were, despite the fact that they were putting themselves at risk, were out there all the time and working. But then you also had, and I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole on this, but then you had the people who didn't want to wear masks, despite the fact that they were being told by healthcare experts, if you wear a mask, you're not doing it for you, you're doing it for the person sitting next to you.
For people like my parents in their 80s.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Or, and so I do think there's sort of an existential struggle going on there. And frankly, I think we only find out, how selfless we are when the moment comes. I don't know that we could predict it. I don't know that we can go on a piece of paper and fill out a chart and say, oh, I'm 80% selfless. It only happens when, as you discovered with your dad, right?
Yeah.
When the moment comes, you either meet the moment or you don't.
Yeah. And two things you're describing, I think, Kevin. One is, we're living through a selfish pandemic today. We are living through some tough times. We're seeing where hate is cheap, violence is cheap, being mean is cheap, using words that are hurtful are way too accessible with very little cost. And that is the existence. We saw it through the racial pandemic with racial strife. We saw it during the viral pandemic where people were, well, like you were just saying, even though the experts, 95% of the experts saying wear the mask around the world. It's not even like it was just uniquely in the United States. Every country in the world was saying do that. But it was selfishly not worn by some. And then we move into the murders and the killings that we had this week and last. And I've told many too many of those stories. That certainly is the epitome of selfishness, where you think you can take a life. And so the selfish pandemic to me is quite real.
Well, and it comes through clearly in your book. We are who we make ourselves, right? In so many ways. I mean, I love the story about your grandparents that you didn't even know what their last name was. I mean, they were illegal immigrants. They came to this country and for all sorts, they changed their name. And it was only when they passed away that you found out who they were. But in a lot of ways, you knew who they were. They just happen to have a different name.
Yeah. And the reason why I tell that story is to show the power of story.
Right.
And they were also, they broke the law. And I do not support breaking the law. I want to underline that. But it is how I got here. If it weren't for my two grandparents who broke the law, came here illegally, I wouldn't be here. And I know they came here in a way that they took a risk, and it was somewhat selfish, but it was also selfless, knowing that their children, whoever they were going to have, I think they had one or two at the time, needed to be in a better place, and that they didn't want their children, their grandchildren, to grow up poor farmers, basically, working their entire lives. My future would have been a poor farmer in the south of China. And instead, I never met this grandfather. He passed away before I was born. But, I say often when I'm speaking that thanks, Grandpa. I'm not a Chinese farmer. I'm a news anchor for a national network, and I am your grandson. And how amazing is this place?
And the thing is, I think more people have those stories than even know them.
Yes,
My
that's correct. I didn't know.
My grandmother, we have her her birth certificate from Donegal, Ireland. We can't find any place where she was actually granted citizenship of the United States. And she probably voted for 50 years. I mean, we all have those stories.
Yeah, and the Irish narrative is so strong and similar to my narrative, or vice versa, whatever you want to say. I tell the story often. I was at the ambassador from Ireland to the United States, and it was a charity, and so all the ambassadors were inviting different folks over, and I got to go to the residence of the private residence of the not the official residence, the private residence of the ambassador from Ireland to the United States. And I was telling her all about the history of the Medal of Honor recipients in the United States. And I said, there are about 3,500. It's a very highly, as you know, the military honor, and there's only about 100 that are alive today, for instance. And
talk about Jack Jacobs.
I am talking about Jack. That's right, Colonel Jack, who I talk about him. He also wrote a nice little thing at the start of the book. He is my hero in so many ways, but about half are of Irish descent. Really? And it's most likely that the first Medal of Honor recipient in America is of Irish descent. And this, despite the term Fighting Irish, which you're very familiar with, it came from that time during the Civil War, because they would still go to battle after landing here with no citizenship, and they would get their last rites before they would go to battle. And hence came the Fighting Irish. And that parallel, well, there aren't that many folks of Asian descent that are on the Medal of Honor recipient list, but the point I make is that the parallel narrative and the selflessness that I believe my grandparents had gone through. I wanted to bring one other thing is that you touched on that I wasn't fast enough to remark on, and it was the idea of being ready to do things that are selfless. And there's two elements to that. One is our approach in the book is very much a self-help book, and on top of that, to be very instruction manual in terms of approach. Very much a blue collar approach to what might be a white collar topic. And because of my business background, I like both the big ideas, but then you have to prove it to me with science, as I said earlier. And so that's the approach. And the key method, which I think is common in modern business thinking, is don't necessarily always go for the big thing. Go for the day-to-day thing. And you build up muscle tone, so that when the big thing happens, you're ready, that you can jump. And the most easily understandable analogy to that are healthcare workers today. Why were they talking to their phones in their cars saying they're scared? They don't know what this virus is. They're coming to work. There are people dying around them without their families. And they're done with the interview. They put down the phone, and where do they go, Kevin? Right back into the hospital.
Right back in. Yeah.
And that is because for years, they've been doing that, taking care of us. Because they could get sick, viruses, everything else. When this thing came around, there were some that did not go. But the majority of the healthcare workers, they had the muscle set, and they jumped.
Let me ask you something else. As I said in the beginning, there is a spiritual component to the book. And I wondered if, when in surveys you see that fewer people feel religious or spiritual in America today than ever before, right? There's a falling away from religion. And I wonder, do you think at some level that you can connect that to perhaps a growing selfishness in America? And at the same time, and let me piggyback on that with the second part, which is, one of the things you talk about in the book is the growth of self-esteem courses in school. And I wonder to myself, would we be better off as a culture if they'd been teaching civics instead of self-esteem?
Yeah, there was quite the I'm okay, you're okay movement there in the 80s and 90s. And that, I don't know if it was healthy or not for us. As you know, in the book, I surmise maybe we should have thought of a better way. And I make fun of it, saying that when I was a kid and the teacher would say, okay, everybody, draw 3 circles. And I would draw 3 triangles, and that the teacher would come over to me and go, oh, Richard, those are very nice circles. They're a little different, but they're very good circles. You're okay. Yeah. And there is, I think, something of a ebb and flow within the last 40 years, but I think we're starting to perfect selfishness. We have the tools to do it. We have the culture to do it. And now's the time to do the opposite. And so this is the approach of, again, a small little antidote towards a very big problem, but very practical.
Yeah, there is a wonderful line in the book about reinforcing the value of we.
Yes, that's right. And almost the title on the book was "What's in It for We," which is now a section head. So and that is the question.
You have to go to work. You have to get to NBC and MSNBC and work. Last I want to ask you, how's your dad?
My dad, well, he gained a pound. He's a fatso, Kevin. Huge guy. He is up to 139. Look, you've been through the journey. You understand what I mean when I say he gained a pound. That's really good. Yeah. Because typically in year 8 of Alzheimer's, when you can't walk and can't talk and cannot eat orally, you got to keep on the weight. And there's lots of things that want to take it away from you. So the fact that this skinny kid is able to gain a pound during the pandemic, I'm okay. Yeah. I'm all right.
Yeah. So he was a minister, which means he was a teacher. So what would be is there a lesson that if he could look at you and what you've done with all this,
yeah,
is there a lesson he would want you to either share or take away from all this?
I think, Kevin, that when I'm sitting there standing next to him and I'm talking to him and he's looking at me and he can't talk, that he is laughing all the way to the bank. I think he's saying, I got my son to write a book about selflessness. See, I got him. I got him to do something about values. That's what I do believe is part of the way we are. I think he would be happy is what my point is. And I think that this is reflective, not only his journey, but my mother's journey, what they showed me in my lifetime, and what people showed me as well in business. As you know, the mentor that I write about there, and because I show how mentorship is a selfless activity set in organizations. He read I talk about lowering the seat and why you lower your seat, if you remember that.
Yep.
And he texts me after getting the book and reading it. He says, whoever that boss guy of yours named Mike is, he is way overrated. I just hope he can live up to it. I texted him back and I was like, Mike, you see, that's the thing. You never, ever thought you were being selfless. You'd always go, oh no, I don't know if I got it right. And every time he was doing the most he could.
Yeah. Well, that was remarkable. And the book is remarkable. Could you I only have an electronic copy. Can you hold up the book?
We almost ready to get to you in fast enough. Here it goes. Yep.
There you go. It's Enough About Me. It's by Richard Lui. It's a terrific book, and I recommend it to the Morning Newsbeat audience. And I really appreciate your finding time for us today.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much. And I am looking forward to listening and watching more of your work.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Take care now.
All right. See you later.